This is the QB Lab podcast. I'm Jake. This is my co-host, Zach, and we are here to bring you a show that you have never listened to, ever heard in your life. It's a show dedicated to the greatest position in sports history, the quarterback position. Zach, how are we doing today?
Oh, we're doing great. I had no idea that intro was going to be that good. I am now psyched beyond belief. I am ready to go.
Yeah, look, that was off the cuff. I did not have that entire piece prepared. All I had was I was going to announce the name. So it's I think we're off to a good start.
Yeah, no, this is great.
Yeah. So look, let's get right down and dirty here. I mean, we got a bunch of stuff to cover. We got a lot of stuff. This is our first episode ever. Of course, the NFL draft is coming up. We're recording this a week before the draft, so we're trying to be as close as we can to the draft to give you the most up-to-date data, the most up-to-date information, so you can really understand which quarterbacks are going to get drafted, when they're going to get drafted, who should take them, all that kind of data. Why don't we start with this, Zach? Who are the teams that need to be looking for a quarterback? Not just the teams that you think are going to get a quarterback, but the ones realistically who also actually need one quite desperately.
Okay, so most of the teams that are getting early draft picks need a quarterback. And if you look at the data overall, if you don't have a good quarterback, you're not putting yourself in a great position to make the playoffs. When you take a look at the overall NFL data and you say, hey, what's most correlated with being able to rack up wins? At the top of the list is quarterback passing play. It's actually interesting that like wide receiver, how well they run their individual routes is a little bit above the QB passing, but they're pretty much neck and neck. So if you're trying to get yourself away from the basement of the NFL and get yourself to at least the middle, you need to be able to find yourself a great quarterback, which is very interesting considering that a lot of analysts are projecting a lot of these early picks aren't going quarterback. A lot of them are projecting some early offensive linemen, some early defensive linemen, some other positions. And I think what we got to do is we kind of have to go team by team, really talk about some of this dumpster fire play we got going on in the NFL and make sure that we put this quarterback position in the appropriate framing.
Well, and I looking at my list that I have prepped here, we got a few teams that we know full well are, as Zach called it, this moment, they're a dumpster fire, right? They're not teams that are moving in the right direction. They're teams that need a quarterback. But I think the big question is there a quarterback actually in this draft that's going to help any of these teams? Because I look at these teams, I got the Titans, who have Will Levis. I mean, the guy, I don't need to look at the data. Like you'll see as you listen to our show, much of the stuff that I talk about is not data-based. Zach is the data whiz. So
stupid stat for you. Will Levis leads the league in top memes. The guy, I don't have it.
So there you go. Right?
Here,
He's the Mayo guy, is he not? Didn't he eat mayo or something?
Yeah, he's a meme factory.
Yeah.
This guy he is so bad that you almost want him in the NFL longer because of the quality of the content.
Yeah.
You need to have one joke quarterback. Actually, Jameis Winston is probably the guy you want as the joke quarterback. Yeah. But jokes aside, this Tennessee Titans team needs almost every position. Like there's very few things that are going right for this Tennessee Titans team. But if you're in their spot, I don't see how you don't go quarterback.
Yeah. I mean, look, we know the top quarterback. We know it's Cam Ward, right? Coming out of Miami, I see here he's 6'2", 223. I've watched quite a bit of his tape. I think he's a dynamic player. I think he has a lot of potential. I see that he's got some physicality, right? He's got the speed. He's got elusiveness. I've seen him throw from every single angle, which gives you a bit of that Kyler Murray, Patrick Mahomes. I mean, I don't want to compare him to Mahomes, but he has some of that throwing ability in terms of the different angles that he can throw off of. He can throw off balance, which I think is a big complaint about him, is that a lot of his throws are off balance, and there's a lot of concern of how that will translate to the NFL. But at the very least, he's arguably the best. He's not arguably, he is the best quarterback in this draft, at least at this point in time. Now, is he an elite starter? I think it's going to be a big question mark. I mean, looking at Pro Football Focus's data, that's so much of the data that we bring in on this show, he's the 21st ranked player. And Zach and I took some looks at other years, and the top quarterback tends to be in the top 3.
Yeah. Cam Ward, another concern that you can have on him is that he doesn't do well protecting the football. So these are going to sound like small numbers, but you have to look at the full population of all of the snaps. He's got one of the higher turnover worthy play percentages of the quarterbacks in this class. He's at a 3.3% rate, which is a full 2% ahead of Shedeur Sanders. Like Shedeur Sanders, he gets lauded for being able to have the highest completion rate in the class. He's someone that makes really smart decisions. He's got ice in his veins. But Cam Ward is, for some reason, understood to be an entire other tier above Shedeur. Now, that being said, if you're the Tennessee Titans or you're whoever has the first overall pick, if you're the general manager, if you don't take Cam Ward, even if it's statistically the right move, you probably get fired. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't talk about enough, that there's the doing the right pick in terms of the statistics of it, but then there's the perception of how that's going to be in the media. If you go ahead and with this number 1 pick, you don't take Cam Ward, your job is gone the next day.
You're fired.
You're fired. And yeah, like that's, hey.
As Donald Trump of the U.S. would say.
Hey, and they play in the same state. So if you got Cam Ward in Miami, you got Donald Trump almost down the street in Mar-a-Lago being able to say, hey, I like this quarterback. But in general, this quarterback class overall is significantly weaker than what we saw 1 season ago. If Cam Ward was in last season's class, I don't think he'd be getting the airplay. In fact, a couple months ago, he wasn't getting the airplay. I think just because of all the drama around Shedeur Sanders is kind of this friction of people being tired of that whole circus, and Cam Ward seeming like the more stellar pick just from a professionalism point of view and with less of the hoopla surrounding him. So I think that Cam Ward ends up going number 1, but I think there's a good argument here of, is this draft class good enough? And if you're the Tennessee Titans and you have a whole bunch of needs to fill, if I'm in their position, I'm actually considering doing what I did in 2016 with Jared Goff. So that was probably one of the worst quarterback draft classes in history. You've got Goff number 1, you got Wentz number 2. You keep going down the list, you got a whole bunch of names that are either like backups now or out the league. I think like the only other notable name that's coming to mind for me is like Jacoby Brissett. Like there wasn't a stacked quarterback class there. And in that position, the general manager at the time was able to swing that number 1 pick and gave up 2 other picks and got something like 6 or 7 picks in return. And although there's obviously the obvious argument, the Rams ended up using that to win a Super Bowl, the Tennessee Titans were a good team for a number of years after. Right. That trade ends up leading to them getting Derrick Henry. And then in those years where Tannehill's under center, Vrabel comes in as a coach. They have a bunch of playoff years. They weren't able to sustain past that.
Marcus Mariota.
They
had him during that span, and they made the playoffs.
It's true. So, like, that Tennessee Titans team from that trade was able to get enough value to bring them up a level that, like, now they've obviously fallen back down. And the Rams, like, obviously go on and win a Super Bowl. I don't know how much of that comes as a result of this particular trade. I think if you look back on that trade, the Tennessee Titans end up winning that trade. And this Cam Ward situation, to me, feels eerily similar. Like, if you were to say, hey, Zach, if you said, hey, I can guarantee you that if you give up the number 1 pick here, you get a whole bunch of value going into next year's draft and you can tank for Arch Manning, I'm very tempted because I think Arch Manning is potentially going to be one of these generational prospects. I just don't have that level of confidence in Cam Ward. Now, it doesn't mean that Cam Ward can't do it. I'm just saying that from the data we have today, which is the best that you can do, I can't stand here and be like, hey, Cam Ward is going to turn this Tennessee Titans team around. And the other point that I want to bring up there is Cam Ward, there's that 3.3% rate of turnover-worthy plays. His wide receiver 1 is Calvin Ridley. Okay? So if I were to say, which wide receiver leads the NFL in average depth of target, I've already set this up. You know it's going to be Calvin Ridley. He's up over 16.
Wow.
He's leading the league by a very large margin. And the problem is the larger or the longer, rather, the average depth of target, the more likely you're going to throw an interception. So if you're in a situation where you've got a quarterback where relative to the class, they throw a lot of interceptions and your wide receiver that you're primarily passing to is almost encouraging that kind of play, I think you're in for a long season, no matter who your quarterback is. So it's a situation where if I'm Cam Ward, I'd actually be nervous that I'm in an organization or I'm in an offense that's set up to fail. That whole series of things, like you saw what just happened with Bryce Young in Carolina, like this is a guy, very well touted prospect. Couple seasons, like that rookie season, he looked horrendous. And now we're seeing a little bit of a change in style. We're seeing some things he's now in a bit more of a position to succeed. But you might have a similar situation with Cam Ward where it takes a season or two for him to get up to speed. And if that's the case, you might be able to draft someone that can help you actually improve your situation now.
Well, and I think, look, there's a lot to unpack there. I think that the simplest thing that I take from that is there's a huge risk in going down the road of drafting a guy like Cam Ward for multiple reasons. One, just in the question marks as him as an NFL quarterback, just for the plain reason you're talking about the turnover worthy plays. If he's leading college in that, we know, generally speaking, quarterbacks who have turnover issues or risk of turnover in college are much more likely to have that issue at a much greater risk when they enter the NFL. The other issue, of course, is that the Titans themselves are not prepared at all for a quarterback. They really don't have anything in place. They got a new coach. They have a brand new system. And the challenge is you bring in a guy, he's probably going to have a really tough time. But on the flip side, and this is sort of where my mind goes, is that it's very hard to give up that opportunity because there's a chance that Cam Ward and or Shedeur Sanders are incredible and can be generational. And the last piece I want to mention is you brought up Arch Manning. Obviously, we hopefully don't talk too much about him over this season just because he's going to be in college. I'm sure we'll mention him, a few times over the course of this season. But next season, we're going to be talking about him a lot. But let's not forget that Trevor Lawrence, everyone said, was going to be generational. He was going to be incredible. He was tall. He was 6', big arms, super smart, really great system type quarterback, can do it all, great pocket passer. And at the end of the day, what does he become? At this point in time, he's an average NFL quarterback at best.
You could make the argument that
he's even
prone too. Like there's a whole bunch
of. Now, I think that's where I hesitate. That it sounds great, right? The Titans trade away the first overall. They move and get all this value like they did in 2016. And Zach, you might make this argument that it was a good trade. In my opinion, it was not a good trade. You ended up with a team that made the playoffs a few times, basically went nowhere, did not win a Super Bowl, did not go to the Super Bowl, never were a true contender in that entire span. And guess what? Jared Goff has been a contender both on the Rams and the Lions, and the Rams flipped him for Stafford and won a Super Bowl. So
I was waiting for that
it's very, very hard to ignore that. Yes, it's a long road. I get it. I could find the pieces to make it work. But the point here is I think if I were the Titans, I'm drafting one of Ward or Sanders for the plain reason that they both have great potential. You're a team that needs something, and there's the business aspect. You need to sell tickets. You need to sell jerseys. Those guys are going to put butts in seats.
Yeah. So that 2016 trade. So obviously the Rams go for the number 1 spot, but the Eagles end up giving a similar type of a package to be able to get Carson Wentz. Those types of trades have been ridiculed so much in the annals of history since that I don't think the Tennessee Titans end up being able to get a package anywhere close to that, which means more likely than not, the Tennessee Titans, they're keeping that pick. And if you have the number 1 pick, I think if you don't go Cam Ward, you are getting fired as the general manager. And I think it's almost a foregone conclusion. And given that's the case, maybe we say some positives about Cam Ward. One thing I like about Cam Ward is that the guy can run. So within this new meta of the NFL, I think if you're going to be giving primary draft capital towards a quarterback, they at least need to be able to scramble effectively. I think that's the new meta of the NFL. I think we're going to go into a meta where the pocket passer ends up being less important. And what you need are people that make those snappy decisions, that know exactly when to scramble. And I think that's perfectly seen from the results of last year's draft class. You've got Caleb Williams, who I know he had like an okay season here and there, but the entire season for me is just distilled into that one play where with 31 seconds left, this guy managed to completely blow it. And I know Eberflus got fired, but Caleb Williams needs just as much flack.
He has to be blamed for that too. The clock management. I mean, for anyone who didn't see the game, they had an opportunity to win, keep their season alive. He has an opportunity to call a timeout, clock it. There's a million things he can do. And he chooses to throw a Hail Mary with no time left. He costs them their season.
Any 12-year-old that has played 300 hours or less hours of Madden knows when to clock that timeout.
Caleb, be better.
Yeah, Caleb needs to be better. But what I want to bring that up is the early data there pointed to Jaden having the potential of being an elite running option. And this season going into the NFL, he scrambled more than any quarterback in the NFL. So if we're trying to say, hey, did this come out of nowhere that Jaden Daniels was amazing, or that you can predict from Jaden Daniels being an effective scrambler that the Washington Commanders were going to rack up wins? No, we're finding ourselves a new meta where if you want to win as many games as possible, you have to jump on the trend that I would argue Patty Mahomes started and that a bunch of people have followed him taken to another echelon, that you need to be able to scramble effectively. And Cam Ward, with the running he's shown in college, has shown that he may be able to grow into that new meta. Now, some of these decisions around passing, I think you can then use that as evidence of, hey, does this guy potentially have as good decision making as we want? And is that transferable to running? But at least he has the underlying skill set. So this isn't a situation where a Tennessee Titans fan is like doom and gloom of like, oh no, I got Cam Ward. It's like, no, you have someone that actually has quite a few skills underneath. It's just a matter of bad luck that the year that your team is bad enough to warrant the number one pick, that you're probably getting a package that looks less than if you'd gotten it in other years.
And I think the other thing to note here, and you already alluded to this, but Cam Ward has a lot of great fundamentals. It's, can he develop? And that's, I think, the piece that, of course, none of us can truly know. None of us can truly understand, because you don't know how a player is going to develop. You also don't know who the QB coach, how good they're going to be at developing him, the team around them, the head coach, the offensive line. We're going to end up talking about that a lot throughout the season, that an offensive line is crucial to any quarterback success. I mean, we look at some of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Tom Brady had a great offensive line for pretty much his entire career. Those things are super important. Having said that, when a player is in doubt, when the pressure's on, you need to be able to trust them. And again, if Cam Ward can develop, if he can use some of the skills that you talked about, if he can use his scrambling skills, if he can use the mental aspect, making quick decisions and getting comfortable and getting confidence, I think he could be a really good NFL player. I think he has potential to be an all-pro, but there's a lot of things that have to go right. And again, like any quarterback that gets drafted, there's a very slim chance that that quarterback's going to turn out to be a superstar.
And it's tough when that offense right now, like if you're to put that whole team on paper, they got a left tackle on offense. They got Calvin Ridley on the outside, but again, his route running, it makes him very different from what you want for a rookie quarterback. He's got a really tough road ahead of him, and I think that it's going to be a narrative that we end up having to follow all season.
So let's move on to the next team. I mean, the Browns, the Cleveland Browns. We all know the struggles they've had. They've actually taken some chances. They've drafted quarterbacks. They've had a first overall pick. They took Baker Mayfield. I would argue they made a big mistake letting him go, because yes, they're obviously, look, coming into the league, the biggest concern was his attitude, the mental aspect of his game. His personality was always a risk, right? And you already talked about this. Cam Ward's a very safe pick when it comes to that. There's certainly some risks when we look at a guy like Baker Mayfield, but
Baker actually had better data than Cam Ward coming into the NFL on 2 seasons. He had two seasons that were better than any season that Cam Ward put up based on PFF data. So this is a situation where they gave up very quickly on Baker, but the underlying data supported Baker 100%.
And he's continued to be a really good player.
He's amazing.
He's been a very good player. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think, were really lucky to land him. And of course, they've locked him up. So he's been a great player. Again, do I call him a great quarterback? Is he, an all-pro or anything at that level? No, but he's a well above average quarterback. And if they would have kept him a little longer, I actually think the Browns would have seen the playoffs a couple more times.
Okay, so I've been looking at a ton of mock drafts online, and nobody has Cleveland going quarterback. It blows my mind. I get it. But if you're the Cleveland Browns, Jakey, what are you taking?
It's really tough. I mean, I always want to say quarterback. I'm a huge quarterback believer. I believe in teams drafting quarterbacks regularly. I don't think even teams who have a good quarterback, they should still be taking quarterbacks in the mid to late rounds just because I think it's the most important position by a mile. However, given the quarterbacks available this year, given the question marks around Shedeur Sanders, I honestly don't know if the Browns are ready for a quarterback. I do think that it makes sense for the Browns in their particular scenario not to trade out of the first round, but to go down a little further. We're talking maybe in the 10 to 12 to 15 and trying to get the third or fourth quarterback in this draft, or even trading further down in the first round. And I see them allowing a quarterback to develop for a year or two because the fan base has gotten their licks of top quarterbacks and then Cleveland moved on from them. I'd like to see Cleveland take a bit more slow developmental approach. Draft a guy, let him sit behind a quarterback for a couple years. Joe Flacco is a Cleveland Brown. And if anyone remembers, if we have any Cleveland Browns fans listening,
He got them to the playoffs.
so that's why I really do believe the Browns are going to trade down, give their rookie a chance to take a year off, don't have any stress, and then look at the next year.
Here's the scenario I have for you. If you're the general manager of the Cleveland Browns, you have the number 2 pick in the draft. I'm very seriously instead considering using my second round pick, because keep in mind, I got the number 2 pick in the second round. If depending on how the draft's going, I could potentially trade up to like a team like the Eagles, like some of these other, like Baltimore doesn't really need that much in this draft. Like there are some of these teams where if you're these later round teams and this draft is not that high caliber in the skill of the players that are in it, I might offer future picks and let them try to bank on the value of future drafts, knowing that this draft isn't as strong, and keep my number 2 pick, because how many times are you really going to get a number 2
You
pick
take that,
as a-
and then you trade like a second and a third to get back into the end of the first or something. That's what you're talking
Yeah,
about, right?
here's my other question. Is Shedeur Sanders going to Cleveland? Like, is Cleveland not on like his list of like, hey, I'm just not going to play there?
It's a good question. Look, as a fan of the NFL, I've seen it happen where players are not happy to go somewhere, or you can feel the anxiety around it. I don't think it's an issue anymore, and the main reason is the money. I think the money has become so big, and the players are just willing to take wherever they go. I know the Cleveland Browns are not a great situation for any quarterback, but at the end of the day, most quarterbacks who get drafted first, second, third overall generally are going to an organization that has been struggling, right? They're there for a reason.
Does Shedeur need money?
He doesn't need as much money as some quarterbacks may need, or some other players may need. Of course, his dad,
It's a unique situation.
it
It's
is
very rare to find someone who's coming from this level of wealth already, where
true.
he's probably thinking of it of, where am I starting my legacy? Like, this is a guy who from day one has been so media ready, of like ice blood in his veins, of just wanting to be able to make the good play, the good moment, be able to build that legacy for himself very early on.
I think you answered it for yourself. A guy who's there to build a legacy, cares about the game. He loves the game. He
Loves the
doesn't
game.
need the money, which is why you take and you go wherever, because you just love the game.
Yeah, but do you really love the game if you're in Cleveland? Like, you saw what that did to, well, no, I think Johnny Manziel had problems before Cleveland.
Yeah.
But there are people that have gone to Cleveland where like Cleveland is broken them.
Hey,
Like, it's,
LeBron James, okay?
yeah.
He loved it there.
Okay, so entertain me for a second, okay?
I don't want to get into basketball, but
Yeah, no, it's fair. But and like LeBron glazing in this era is just out of control.
yeah,
But let's say you're Cleveland and you don't go quarterback. Who are you going with?
it's a very good question. Hunter,
I think it's
can you go? Can you go, Travis Hunter?
I think you actually have to if you're Cleveland, but I
Because
don't
he's that good.
but I don't think it's for the reason that you think.
Okay, let's hear it.
So like there's the argument here that Abdul Carter is the guy that should go number 2, just because he's like this generational level talent. And then there's obviously been all of that narrative around put him next to Myles Garrett and you're going to have one of those crazy defensive lines in football. And that's obviously very important. Like once you get your quarterback figured out, having that elite level pass rush is that next level of how you get yourself from like middle of the pack to being a real contender within a playoff position. So I understand, hey, having good defensive line, very, very important. However, if you're Cleveland and all you have is a defense, what is that really? But the thing that I think is important here is you have the worst contract in sports on your books. You have hundreds of millions of dollars wrapped up in a guy who's too mentally weak to be able to play anymore. Like, I think he actually played pretty decently, like for a couple games to start the season. But then once the media attention
Nothing left.
once the media attention came around, was like, hey, is this really our quarterback? He fell off a cliff. He's done. It's over. But the thing about having such a bad contract is you have the first two-way generational talent in I don't know how many years, and you now have the ability to remedy where you have hundreds of millions of dollars of waste spent with a guy that could potentially, maybe not immediately play two positions, but grow into two positions. You kind of need to have a creative way to get around the fact that this contract issue is going to hurt your team for the foreseeable future.
Watson is a problem. Before we continue on talking about teams that need quarterbacks and the quarterbacks themselves, I want to cover one more item, and then we'll get right into the nitty-gritty because I'm sure the audience is waiting. But that Deshaun Watson signing has got to be one of the worst signings in NFL history. Yeah. Not just like let's hold off about the money for a moment because you've already covered that, but we'll go into a little detail there. But you brought in a guy who allegedly like 40 or 50 women and was already going downhill. No other team is interested in him because they don't want to touch him with a 10-foot pole. And they bring him in, give him total guarantee. What did they give him? Like 200?
I think it's 213, but I could be wrong.
180. We'll call it 200 million. Guaranteed, totally guaranteed. He did things that are totally illegal.
Oh, yeah.
Got away with it, right? Yeah. He did some payments with them. He managed to get out of all of it. He didn't go to jail, but obviously he was a criminal.
Criminal activity aside, his biggest claim to fame to that moment was get hit by two guys at the same time, go on to make the game-winning play, and that was like the statement of his career so far.
Yeah.
So they looked at that like
one moment.
He had a good season before that. Don't get me wrong, but $200 million
guaranteed
for a guy.
Totally guaranteed.
How many playoff games did he win? Like, was that his only playoff?
No one gets total guarantees.
No, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Kirk Cousins got a total guarantee of $88 million like 3 years before that.
Yeah.
But firstly, Kirk Cousins was proven good quarterback, good leader, didn't have any extracurriculars going on. True football player.
Cleveland's just a joke of a franchise. If I remember correctly, this was just like them being high on the fact that like they had OBJ's son
name.
They were in win now mode, and this is the price you pay when you're in win now mode and you put all of your hopes on Deshaun.
That's why you have about 100 million left on the books.
Yeah, and now you've got a situation where your entire team is like one player.
So let's cover, I sort of want to knock out the next few teams pretty quickly. I'm going to list them off and we'll go through these teams of what's going to happen to them. And I really want to cover some of the rookie quarterbacks in this draft. So we got the Giants, we got the Raiders, we got the Jets, we got the Steelers. Outside of the Steelers, I would say the Jets are a dumpster fire. The Raiders are a dumpster fire. The Steelers, I think, are actually the best team there that if they got a good quarterback, that quarterback would be in really good position.
Now, at the time of recording,
Steelers have a great receiving core.
No, the Steelers are a phenomenal
team. They're serious.
I think there's like one interior defensive lineman that they need, but other than that, like
they're pretty set.
They're going to get everything
great coaches. You got DK Metcalf as your number one receiver.
Fun fact. Who do you think the number one receiver is according to PFF data on that team? It's actually Pickens still, apparently.
Is it really?
So Pickens, to me,
he's great. I think he's a great receiver. I do. I think he's shown, to me, his hands are incredible.
Here's my thing with Pickens, okay? His raw talent, nobody can question.
Incredible.
Nobody can question. But, like, for me, he just does all of these other things around football that makes it seem like okay, you had Kobe Bryant, who had, like, the Mamba mentality. George Pickens, by comparison, I gotta call it like a llama mentality, because it's a guy who's just like barking from the corner. And actually, it's perfect because llama starts with 2 L's. So every time he makes a mistake, he has a second L that he takes with it. All he does is he gets himself in a position where, oh, I dropped the ball. I'm going to push another guy on the sideline. I'm going to do all of these little mental mistakes that you totally don't need to do. So, like, his talent is unquestionable, but that lack of focus actually manifests itself in the data as well. Because if you look at it, he has like one of the highest drop rates in the NFL.
And I was talking about his hands because, and I should clarify, because some of the catches he makes are unbelievable, like OBJ style. So you think, wow, this guy is the real deal. But I think this is an issue. I'm glad you brought up his drop rate, because I do think that's an issue across the board with some of these diva style wide receivers. We've seen it with some other receivers with big egos where it's not that there isn't the talent there. It's not that they don't have great hands. It's a focus thing. They lose focus. They don't stay focused throughout the games. They have what we would call mental farts, I guess.
Yeah. Like, okay. So the thing I have to clarify is it can be true that they have great hands and they have a high drop rate.
Yeah.
Those two things can exist. So let's say, I think George Pickens, his drop rate is somewhere around 12%. That means 88% of the time, his hands can still be doing phenomenal things, right?
But can he be trusted in big moments?
No, that's why they
Clearly
put DK
not.
Metcalf. But do you know who else has one of the highest drop rates in the NFL? DK Metcalf. So now you have two guys that have very similar games that are going to do what? Both go routes from the edges? Like, what are we doing here? So to be that confident in getting those types of wide receivers without knowing for certain who your quarterback is a very
risky.
It's a questionable move from a general manager. So at the time of this recording, Aaron Rodgers hasn't signed anywhere.
Correct.
If Aaron Rodgers does sign, he can throw a go ball still. Like, sure, he didn't have a great season last time.
Aaron Rodgers' arm. Look, we're talking a lot about data, and I've already said a few times I like the old eyeball test.
Yep.
And from what I saw in Aaron Rodgers last year, and I get that a lot of people are going to say, well, on the Jets, he lost his mojo. He wasn't into it anymore. That's just an excuse. I'm sorry. The guy's arm does not look like he's got it anymore. I personally do not think he's got the arm talent to throw true go balls anymore.
Well,
he doesn't have that Hail Mary ball like he had. I don't think he has the strength.
Here's my stance.
I also don't like him in general, but that's a whole different story.
No, my stance.
Did you watch his show?
I tried getting through the first episode and I couldn't.
I watched the whole show mainly because I don't like him. I almost wanted to see him. It was addictive. But anyways,
did they go through the ayahuasca?
Oh, yes, fully.
Okay. So here's if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, I am not signing Aaron Rodgers. And the reason goes bigger than just like the talent that's here. Like, I think he still ended up as like a top 20 quarterback by all of the data, which is fine. But you can't have the hoopla around Aaron Rodgers if you're Mike Tomlin and you're trying to create this.
You don't want that.
This whole attitude of this team is, we are going to wear you down. We are going to sack you. We are going to do things that other teams they get other teams so uncomfortable. They haven't even needed offense at an elite level. Now, that being said,
they don't need extra storylines.
Now, that being said, last year, Justin Fields and Russell Wilson both played a lot better than expected. So they actually got helped by quite a bit of good quarterback play, and they need someone there. But if I'm in this position and I say, hey, would I rather be in a situation where I want to grow a quarterback for a couple of seasons, or get a new quarterback level of draft capital that I might be able to deal elsewhere, or Aaron Rodgers? No brainer. I'm not taking Aaron Rodgers, because that is a dead man's contract.
And then Aaron Rodgers, if he doesn't go there, does he go to the New Orleans Saints? Potentially, right? We know Derek Carr may not play this season. It's sort of up in the air. I think the Saints are not a bad landing spot for him either. To be honest, I see the Steelers and Saints being good landing spots, but at the same time, exactly what you said, if I'm the Steelers, as high of a pick as they have, I'm not going Aaron Rodgers. I agree. I think they have a high enough pick given the quarterback class and where I think they're going to actually fall in the first round. I think the Steelers can still get themselves a decent quarterback. And then on top of it, you already mentioned this, Justin Fields. He's on the Jets. Yep. What do the Jets do? Do the Jets go quarterback, or do they believe in Justin Fields? Because Justin Fields did look pretty good in the limited game play he had last year with the Steelers.
If you're the Jets, you probably roll with Justin Fields. They gave him, I believe, $10 million a
Yeah,
year, something
something like
somewhere in that contract. So you're paying him like a QB. I think you end up having to roll with him, but I think it's the type of thing
short leash.
short leash. And because Justin Fields still has legs under him, he's done enough over these past seasons where like if you need to leverage that draft capital elsewhere, you still have that option. But the Jets are kind of a train wreck in most parts of the ball. I think they've got bigger problems than like, do you have the better quarterback right now? I think they just got to like figure out what planet.
Well, it's crazy because just a season ago, they had the best defense in the league or one of the, and now all of a sudden their defense totally fell apart last year. Their offense is a mess. Now, new coach, new quarterback, everything new. So they got a lot to figure out. So maybe they're not well suited for a quarterback, or maybe it's similar to the scenario that I was talking about with the Browns. You draft a quarterback, you let him sit behind Fields for a year or two. The problem with that, obviously, is you don't have a veteran. Justin Fields is not a veteran quarterback that's going to be able to train this rookie quarterback. That's, I guess, the big problem.
Yeah, I think if you're the Jets, what you do is you have the number 7 pick. You've got Justin Fields for a season. Take an elite offensive lineman. Taking an elite one, you've got Breece Hall behind you. You've got a good running game. You can try to make that a bit more of your identity in the background. I think you got Justin Fields there. You got to take at least that 1 year gamble on him and see what happens.
Yeah. And look, the guy can run. He can throw. He's got incredible talent. I personally like Justin Fields. I think Chicago gave up on him way too early. I think the Steelers didn't give him enough of a chance. I thought they should have rolled with him. I did not think they should have switched to Wilson. I thought they should have stuck with him for the rest of the season. I think that they would have been a much better team with Fields based on just everything he can do. He is a true dual threat, and he's still really young. He can still be developed and trained.
Well, the Bears have gotten in this pattern where they draft the quarterback, get a new coach in, get rid of the quarterback.
And that a few times now, 3 times now, right?
Yeah. So I think they just have short attention spans, and what they have to be able
Big market.
it's a big market, which is going to make you have a shorter attention span. Yeah. But like, look at the Bears now. Now that you got now that everybody's kind of settled down, they're at least trying to believe in Caleb as the guy. I've still got question marks there if Caleb will become the guy. But you got some great pieces around Caleb, and they got actually a pretty interesting draft ahead of them. So I'm actually kind of excited to see what Chicago becomes. But if we climb back up this draft class, the next one that's on the board are the Giants. And I think that's an interesting one to watch because I don't think Shedeur wants to play in Cleveland. And if Cleveland knows that, and they
falls to New York,
no one hires an employee when the employee is saying, I don't want to.
I personally don't think he will have an issue. I think he'll be happy to go anywhere. But yeah, I mean, he's a bright lights kind of guy. If he's anything like his dad, I think he would like playing in New York.
Now, here's the thing about New York. You just signed Russell Wilson, who was quarterback 15 on PFF data 1 season ago. You got Jameis Winston behind, who I actually think should be a utility. I think he's so entertaining for the NFL that he is mandated to start. I think if anybody has a quarterback they're trying to start that's worse than Jameis Winston, the NFL needs to step in and let Jameis Winston be the starter because he's that funny for the game. But let's park that away. He's the backup this year to last year's PFF number 15 quarterback. And I do think Russ has potentially a season in the tank. He had a great record when he was a starting quarterback for Pittsburgh.
Don't agree. I already talked about it, right? I said I thought Justin Fields should have been the guy. I thought they should have stuck with him. I didn't think they should have gone to Russ. The issue I have with Russ, and you know the stats a little better, but I just look at the guy and he looks done. To me, he looks done. He looks uninterested, and he looks way too reliant on everybody else. And I don't believe in quarterbacks that way. I think quarterbacks need to run the show, and I don't think he's got it. But like I've said for 2 other teams already, I could see the Giants drafting Shedeur Sanders, letting him sit, even for probably not for an entire season. I think he's good enough, and I think that the New York press is strong enough and powerful enough that I think realistically what ends up happening is you start the season with Russell Wilson, maybe you play 4 or 5 games, and then you go to Shedeur Sanders. I think that that's how I see it. I don't see Russell Wilson being their true starter if they're taking a guy like Sanders. I just don't see how they could shake that.
Yeah, I was gonna turn and flip on you in the last second. I think if you're the Giants in this spot, you have to go Shedeur. the easy argument is to say, hey, you got Russell Wilson. Hey, you got Jameis Winston. But if you actually look at the contracts, they're only paying about 14, 15 mil a year for the two of them. That's totally fine in this
You can
situation.
move on from guys like that.
Exactly. If you bring in a Shedeur Sanders level of talent with that kind of a name, with the big lights, you got Malik Neighbors on the edge. I actually really like Tyrone Tracy at the running back position. And you already have a great defensive line that you can build upon. I think now is the time you go with a guy like
You
Shedeur
have
Sanders.
you have a solid team. I don't think they're a total disaster. I think that there's potential there. You know, they have room to grow, but there's potential there. I want to move on specifically now to break down some of the quarterbacks in this draft. I want to talk about these guys. I got a few here, and I think you have one that I didn't have on my list, but we're going to add him, and I'm going to say his name because I love his name, or at least his last name.
All right.
We got Cam Ward, who we've really talked about in depth. We've talked a little bit about Shedeur Sanders, but there's a few here that we haven't talked about. We haven't talked about Jalen Milroe. We haven't talked about Will Howard, Riley Leonard, Jackson Dart. What a name. That guy for sure can throw a dart. And we got, is it Tyler Shuck?
Yeah.
Tyler Shuck, who honestly, I hadn't read up a lot about. I'd heard of him, but I hadn't really read up a lot about him because he hadn't really been a realistic high draft pick. But apparently in the last couple of days, he started to move up the board. So why don't we break down a few of those guys, Zach? Talk about some of the data here and what you're seeing and really where these guys should land.
Okay. I'm going to throw a lot of numbers at you. I'm not going to tell you who the two quarterbacks are. Okay.
Got it.
Okay. So about similar in terms of PFF grade on passing, similar in terms of running. You've got one quarterback whose big time play percentage is 7% versus 6.3%. You've got 2.2% on turnover worthy plays versus 3.3%. Average depth of target farther, 11.9 versus 9.8, which speaks to arm strength.
Mm-hmm.
They hold onto the ball less, 2.77 seconds versus 2.93 seconds. And the NFL passer rating is 122.3 versus 119.9. Are you taking quarterback A or quarterback B?
Well, I'm pretty sure that the quarterback that you mentioned with the 3.3 turnover worthy plays is Cam Ward, because you mentioned it earlier in the episode.
But didn't you hear that the data there for that quarterback was worse on every metric?
Correct.
So who's the
Tyler Shuck?
No, we're talking about Jackson Dart.
Wow. Okay. So so that's interesting because from everything that I've read with regards to Dart, honestly, with regards to Milroe, Howard, Leonard, and Dart, none of them people have above the second round.
Yep.
None of them are going in the first round. Now, well, I should say none of them are going. No one seems to think any of them are going in the first round. Based on that data, if we're really serious about the data, I don't see how you can't be at least considering some of these guys. Or if you feel that other teams aren't, then you draft them in the second round, but you definitely got to keep them high on the list. I do want to look at Dart's. Yeah, I want to look at Dart's physical.
What's his size?
Yeah, this is interesting.
Yep.
He's 6'2", 225. And guess what Cam Ward is?
Yep.
6'2", 223. So they're almost the exact same dimensions.
You know what they're saying about Dart? They're saying he's small.
Wow.
Yeah. You know who else is 6'2"?
Shedeur Sanders.
You know who else is 6'2"? Patrick Mahomes. Mm-hmm. So if you're trying to make the claim
Mahomes is 6'2".
6'2".
Wow.
So if you're trying to make the claim that this guy is too small, sure, he can bulk up over the course of a couple of years, but you're going to have to find a better argument about that for Jackson Dart. The other argument I'm hearing about Jackson Dart is that he was too, like his system was too perfect for his throwing style, but he's throwing the ball down the field. He's showing that arm strength. He's showing that ability to not throw interceptions despite throwing it farther down the field. I think there are a bunch of teams that would love Jackson Dart, and I think one of those teams could be the New Orleans Saints, because you've got people like Rashid Shaheed, you've got Chris Olave, you've got these guys that are
some serious receivers
down the field and want a guy like that throwing to them. So if you're looking at this number 9 pick, there's a bunch of people that are saying Shedeur Sanders might fall there. I don't buy it. I think that this draft is going to follow the pattern of last draft, where people were not projecting quarterbacks to go early, and then somehow even the Atlanta Falcons are drafting a quarterback. A whole bunch of
because the importance of the position. That's why Zach and I have a fantasy football league with 2 quarterbacks starting.
Which, by the way, if you still have a kicker in a defense in your league, you really got to change it up because they
cut him out.
Doesn't make a difference. But the idea here is
interesting.
Jackson Dart, for whatever reason, now I get why his data is not really being bought the same way Cam Ward's is, because Jackson Dart is I think he has less competition in the field of teams that he played against. I have to double check that.
And there's one other huge piece, which I did read about quite a bit. And this is the biggest knock on him. One, yes, the competition, but two, full field reads. He doesn't really have to do them in his system now. He's kind of going to have to do that in the NFL. Now, granted, he goes to a team like the Saints, and if they're a run and gun and they're going deep, he might be able to get by with something like that, especially because they have a great run game.
Yeah. I mean, I could very easily picture a play action situation where I think Kamara still has a season in him with the amount of he did very, very well last season, Kamara, in terms of being able to create these big explosive plays. Fake to Kamara, and you got Rashid Shaheed going down the wing. You got Chris Olave potentially getting open. You have so many weapons there that I think it's hard for a guy in that situation with his talent and his mix of throws down the field. It's hard to not want to bet on a situation like that.
So I want to get a clear nutshell for everyone to understand and everyone to hear. How many quarterbacks do we think are going in the first round?
First round, I'm probably going at least 3. I think there is an argument, depending on the team, to even potentially go more than that. But because last year we had those surprises, like for instance, Atlanta really surprised me coming out of last year. But you had a bunch of teams in the top 10 that went for quarterback where everyone was projecting, oh, we're going top offensive lineman, oh, we're going top defensive lineman. I think everybody right now is really projecting this Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter and Genty situation, who are probably the 3 best players in the draft. But let's go down the list.
And who are the 3? Who are these 3 quarterbacks?
So the top 3 are Ward, Sanders, and Dart. I think that's a clear tier 1. I've seen argument that Ward is in a tier all in his own. But when I look at some of this peripheral data, I don't think it's that clear cut. I think that, for instance, even a month ago, I was seeing arguments that Sanders should be neck and neck with Ward. I think Sanders is being docked because of the fact that so many of his plays are happening at or behind the line of scrimmage. But I've seen a ton of plays where I got to see him throw it down the field. People are questioning his arm strength. I think I'm higher on Shedeur Sanders than the average person, although I will say, I don't know that he's a generational talent just yet. I think he has a lot to prove going into the NFL, but I don't think he's a lesser quality of prospect than Cam Ward. I think they're at least neck and neck. And then Jackson Dart, just based on some of these peripheral statistics, if you have the proven ability to throw it down the field with how few turnovers you're doing by comparison, it's hard not to want to bet on a guy like that. But then after that, you got a bunch of tier 2s. But I do think the number that go in the first round is going to be completely dependent on how some of those first picks go. So for instance, let's say you're the Cleveland Browns. Use that number 2 pick and you get yourself a Travis Hunter. I could see a situation where they take their second round pick and trade up into the late first.
Take a quarterback. And maybe that's how we get to 4 quarterbacks potentially.
And at that point, there are a bunch of other names on the board where, because they're in that tier, I don't really have a massive, it's hard for me to say that hey, we got a massive bust situation here because we're dealing with the Cleveland Browns where no matter what they do, they are going to suck. There's no real way around that. So whoever they pick, as long as they're trying to get themselves into the quarterback conversation,
then at least the GM doesn't lose his job.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's point there too. But also, if you're potentially the New York Giants as well, and you say, hey, at the number 3 pick, if you take Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, can't really fault you. These are going to be
great. They're great players.
But they could also take their early second round pick and trade up as well. So I think a lot of it is going to be dependent on how some of those early picks are spent. But let's talk about the Raiders for a second.
Yeah.
Because the Raiders themselves, I get that you got
Geno
Smith. I'm not a Geno believer. I think this is
first round draft pick.
Yeah. So was Zach Wilson.
And EJ Manuel.
Zach Wilson was one of the highest rated, based on the data, draft picks to have gone in the past decade.
So the data can be wrong.
Well, data can't measure psychology. I think the psychological...
And it can't measure development.
But I think with Geno Smith, this is a guy that I think has been run-of-the-mill. I think he's been pretty average. He's been, good here and there.
He had one great season.
But for some reason, he's being treated with a level of respect that is a little bit undeserved to me. And I think if you're the Raiders,
you're still drafting a guy. I still think you're drafting a guy as the Raiders, a quarterback.
So the question will be, is it first round or is it second round? Because if you have Genty on the board,
Yeah, you're taking him. No, you're drafting in the second round. You're probably like, I have a couple guys here. I think you're probably taking like a Jalen Milroe if he's still around. Or honestly, I really like Riley Leonard. I think the guy's got great potential. I like his physical ability, dual threat, all that stuff.
Has going for him. He's got the best running game of any of them. So I think that what we have to do is recognize that in this meta, if you can get yourself a guy that can run incredibly well at quarterback, first off, you could in theory develop him to be like a Taysom Hill. I know Taysom Hill is technically a tight end, but like there's wildcat things you can do with quarterbacks that can do that.
It could be a little more utility.
You can,
right?
But if you also then use the season to train the guy that we already know can run well to be able to throw in a system and if you have Ashton Genty behind you too.
And if you keep the system safe,
exactly,
right? Strict, safe, couple reads, get it out quickly, then it could work.
Yeah, but the thing that Riley Leonard hasn't proven to me yet is right now his average depth of target is 7.5. Typically, you want to see it above 9. Like coming out of the college, the data.
You want to see it a lot deeper.
So, but I do like him. I like your idea though of that's totally fine for the second round, because if you got a second round bust of a quarterback, that's allowed.
Risk is super low.
If in the first round you got Genty, and like if Sanders and Ford are off the board already, the best offensive, like I know that Travis.
You don't have any great quarterbacks left there potentially. I mean, outside of Dart, maybe.
I think you could make an argument to me even that Ashton Genty might be the best offensive player in terms of talent, even over Travis Hunter. And I know Travis Hunter won the Heisman, but here's the thing. Travis Hunter's a little bit undersized. There's the potential where like as he's running routes, because he's undersized, he can be knocked off. Like
stuff that you wouldn't see in college. He's going to be playing with men now. It's going to be a little different.
I think the take here is that Travis Hunter is going to be more immediately NFL ready as a corner than as a wide receiver.
Yeah, I agree with that totally.
But it can also be a type of thing where like, you know, like let's say you need like a spark plug for like a play or two, throw Travis Hunter in, let's like throw him on the route and just watch what defenses try to do.
Lightning, right?
So, but the point is, if the argument could be made that Genty might be the best offensive player in the draft and Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are off the board and you're the Raiders picking up, what is it, 6?
Yeah.
Picking at 6. You can't go wrong taking Genty there, but I think you end up having to take a quarterback in a later round because you cannot bank on Geno Smith for the long term.
You can't not take a quarterback. Yeah, look, so we're going to wrap this episode up. This was amazing. I mean, we covered rookie quarterbacks, some of the top guys. We covered the NFL draft itself and who's taking who and who should take. Talked a little bit about the importance of the quarterback, all that stuff. We're going to have tons of more great stuff to come. Hey, Zach?
I have one more question for you.
Go ahead.
You're the Colts. What do you do?
Not take a quarterback. I think you're rolling with Anthony Richardson. I think he still has potential, you know, injuries, have an attitude, all that stuff, but I don't think you can give up yet. He's too high of a pick. Don't give up yet. I mean, I almost have to stick with that because I just finished saying that I thought Mayfield has given up too quickly. I thought Chicago gave up on Fields too quickly. So I'm a guy that wants to give quarterbacks an opportunity, so I would not give up on him yet.
Yeah, I think you offensive lineman, you give him another chance.
Yeah, you got to build that up. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for listening. This is the QB Lab Podcast. I'm Jake. This is Zach. We'll be seeing you every month.